So welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit about the measurement of corruption, and that is an extremely hard thing because, as I mentioned before, it's not always about paying like cash for a service. Sometimes there's favors traded, and we don't even really know that firm line between a gift and an act of corruption. So it's actually kind of hard to even know what to measure. Um, so there's no real direct ways of measuring corruption. I mean, there's indexes and surveys and perceptions of corruption and things like that, but I'm not all that convinced that any of that's any good. But what we can do is we can measure some of the economic effects of corruption, although that's not all that black and white either, because there's kind of a good and bad side of it. So let's talk about the positive effects of corruption. On the positive side, especially in a lot of developing Southeast Asian countries, it can be argued that it promotes economic development because it reduces a lot of uncertainty. So, for example, in Indonesia, bribes were clearly posted, and you knew who to go to pay a bribe, and you knew how much to pay. So it reduced a lot of uncertainty and bureaucracy, and of course, when you paid, you knew when it would get done. That's one kind of way of looking at it. And so we can interpret corruption in many ways as efficiency enhancing. In other words, it motivates civil servants to do their job when they may not otherwise have any incentives to perform. You could say it, oils the mechanism or greases the wheels of a large public bureaucracy. It's a way to break through red tape, for a lack of a better term. And of course, you can make the same argument that firms that have the most capital to spend on bribes are the most efficient, and therefore it continues as kind of a reinforcing mechanism or a reinforcing loop that it enforces or reinforces a firm's success and efficiency, because then they in turn get more money to pay more bribes over the long term, and those less efficient firms can kind of disappear. And even at the individual level, it can help you prioritize. For some people, they may need some sort of governmental support desperately, but those that are willing to pay the bribe will get serviced first, and those that are less willing to pay the bribe, they want to use their money for other priorities, well, they would kind of get pushed towards the bottom of the pile. And of course, bribes can also help politicians get the capital together in such a way that they can use that money to hold the country together, prevent civil wars and things like that. So those are some of the arguments. Those are some arguments for corruption. Of course, they can also supplement low civil service wages. I mean, we talk about in a lot of countries where the police are being bribed all the time. That's unfortunate. But you can also consider the fact that in those countries where those police cannot, supplement their income in any way other than bribery, then they wouldn't become police officers. So yeah, they're going to shake down a foreign tourist for money, but then they're available at least on the payroll now so that they can solve real crimes at the same time. That's another positive argument regarding corruption. Of course, there's a lot of bad arguments about it too, because it encourages people not to do their job so much, but rather it encourages them to look for bribes. So I'm not going to be a great cop. I'm not going to solve real murders. I'm just going to try to shake down tourists and the like for bribes, because that's what's more important to me. So that's one of the counter arguments to it. And of course, if civil servants know that they're going to get bribed to speed up procedures, then that also can motivate them to slow down the processing time of those who do not pay bribes. Of course, corruption can also lead to an increase in income inequality. So the rich people are the ones that can pay bribes, and they can continue to pay for more privileges, and then they can get richer and richer. Of course, when governments want to impose some sort of a regulatory control, they can't really do that because all their civil servants are on somebody else's payroll. Unlike countries that have a very well-defined tax code where you can kind of predict how much your taxes are, sometimes bribes and corruption are arbitrary, and so there's an arbitrary cost of doing business, and therefore it can reduce foreign companies and even domestic companies' willingness to invest in a particular country, because they can't really calculate what the final cost will be. And another corollary to that is the over-reliance on bribes can reduce protection of even things so basic as law and property rights. So that can also scare people off from doing businesses, and it undermines the legitimacy of capitalism and a market economy more broadly. And of course, one of the other problems with corruption is it can increase poverty. And you think about why. Your major multinational firms and even your domestic firms are the ones that have a lot of money. And so they have more capital to spend on bribes, but they can also hire full-time lawyers and accountants to deal with issues of corruption. They could even have actual employees whose job is to deal with aggressive bureaucrats. So $10,000 bribe to a large corporation, is not that big of a deal. However, $10,000 to a small business owner, just like owning a small restaurant or something, that can put them out of business. So it tends to harm the poor disproportionately. Another problem with corruption is it can basically hurt people more at the local level than it can at the national level. Large national firms, again, because of the tremendous capital that they can accumulate, can be dealing more with their peers in the political or the legislative bodies of their respective countries, whereas local businesses will be dealing more with petty bureaucrats. So again, it's going to be a higher tax imposed, and there's a lot more arbitrary impacts on it. And of course, again, one of the things with corruption is that if people are spending all their money trying to pay bribes, as I mentioned, it reduces investment spending, including foreign direct investment, but it can reduce expenditures on education and health, because the people that can afford to pay the bribes get into the better public schools. The people that can afford to pay the bribes can get into better medical facilities, while those who can't do not. Of course, it can also increase public spending, which sounds good, right? More investment in roads and buildings and things like that. But again, I mentioned in one of my previous videos, it's a much less efficient form of public investment and spending because there's being bribes paid the whole time. And therefore, things like maintenance expenditures can be reduced. So in our next video, we're going to talk about things that a government can do to reduce the presence of corruption. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, give me a thumbs up, comment below, subscribe, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.